nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Hi everybody, I just want to welcome you to Remembering Science Fiction Television Shows of the 1960s and 1970s. This is our episode number 5, The Outer Limits. And with me tonight is my guest co-host. I have a friend and a longtime thespian and teacher, Mr. Craig Evans. Craig, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Roy. It's so good to be here. It's been a pleasure to watch all these shows till now, and to be on it is just a treat. Thank you so much for asking me.
Oh, absolutely, Craig. It's wonderful to have you on with me, and really looking forward to discussing The Outer Limits. I mean, there's a lot of history about this show. It's really amazing, and I actually have been a fan of this show probably since the 70s. I grew up with it in syndication as probably like around the mid 1970s, but I didn't have the opportunity to watch it when it was first on, and I know you and I had talked about that, so you definitely had that privilege, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, I was just a little kid when it started, but it's funny. It's one of those shows I thought I knew better than I probably do, but that opening brings back all kinds of memories. And when you recommended watching the trailer, it was amazing to me that that's the vision I had, was of the alien who shows up in it somewhere, hazy in my memory. That is the Outer Limits image to me, is that being coming out of that screen.
Oh, that's so cool.
So, about Outer Limits anyway, being what I think of as a kind of ultimate scary TV show.
No, I totally agree. In fact, some of my earlier recollections of watching the series, there was one episode I was telling you about, actually, even before I get there, just starting with, the pilot. I mean, we were talking about the galaxy being, and that was the one that was with Cliff Robertson that premiered in 1963. And that was, he was a pretty reputable actor too. And to be launching that series and, with him on board was pretty cool.
I think what was neat about watching that one was how it's a 50-minute show. So that says something about how fewer commercials there were in 1963, for one thing. So when we watch an hour show now, it's 40 minutes. And you know that when you watch it on Hulu or somewhere. But 50 is a lot of dialogue to fill in there and plot to cover. Even though some of these episodes do feel maybe they would have been better off as a half hour or 40 minutes. The dance scene, for instance, in that one seems to go on a little bit longer than it needs to. It's like, less dancing, more alien, please. But that said, what they were doing with sort of minimal special effects, not exactly, putting a whole bunch of money necessarily into known writers or, people from all the pulp science fiction writers. I'm sure they use some. You would probably know more about that in your research than, say, Twilight Zone did. But what they did with what they did is really something, even looking back.
Yeah, and in fact, the creator of the show, Leslie Stevens, he was a creator on the show and he was a writer. And then also you had Joseph Stefano. Joseph Stefano was actually known, he did a movie, a 1960 movie, which was called Psycho, which I'm sure everybody knows about out there. Oh, you know what? Before I go on, I just want to say hi to everybody that's checking in. Want to say hi to Dennis. Hey, Dennis, how you doing? Isabel is checking in from the UK. Isabel, nice to see you out there. I know it's late out there, and you can see the cats. Yep, I think Squeaker and Marble actually made it into the picture. Hey, Deborah, how you doing? And John and also Sue from the Ticonderoga group. Thanks for joining, everybody. And I saw Mike Rizzo was on with me. Hey, Mike, thanks for joining. I may have missed a few people, but yeah, welcome everybody. I'm really happy to have you on here. Of course, we didn't launch exactly on time, but you know what? If I did, then that would kind of be a scary thing. So we're doing good. We are broadcasting using Zoom. I have this kind of jury rigged. Craig is impressed or giving a little commendations on what we did here. I don't know. I'm just kind of like, spit, glue, and polish, they say, but it's working. So as long as it works, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And Craig, I'm knocking, Craig.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the creator and how when we talk about Twilight Zone, you have to think Rod Serling's Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
In the same way that opening is so iconic for Outer Limits, the opening may be the best part of every episode. No offense to the program.
No, and in fact, that the person that actually did that, his name is Vic Perrin, and he has such a distinct voice. And I think over the years, I mean, if you talk to anybody, everybody remembers the control voice from that show. That is the signature staple of the Outer Limits. And when you hear that voice, it kind of almost sends shivers up you because you know what's coming. I mean, that show, the way it was filmed and photographed, it was almost like with the film I always have a problem pronouncing this, film noir. I mean, of like the 1930s, the 40s. It's very distinct, and with the camera angles and the way they would just shoot up, and the entire mood and intensity of that series really was developed around that. Of course, with the stories and everything adding to it, but it really gave the feel and the tone of the show. And what Joseph Stefano would say, especially in the first season episodes, the majority of the first season episodes, they would have some kind of creature or alien that he referred to as being the bear. And it could, the special effects were not, incredible by any means, but you know what? It still can really terrify you and scare you. And it's the angles and the way, the tone of the setting. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I was telling you when we were talking about the show, there was an episode that to this day when I watch it, because it basically scared the crap out of me as a kid. It was called The Production and Decay of Strange Particles. And it was these creatures that came through an opening, like a rip in the universe through this atomic isotope. And what happened was they invaded these radiation suits that the technicians were protected in. And what happened was when they did this, you would see this lightning arcing through their faceplate. And it was just gruesome. And I don't know, it's just like even when I watch this show, it's it's very basic. I had even read in some of the books, the source material that I have, that it wasn't really a lot of money spent as far as production values. But it's just the way it was handled, and it was the way it was filmed, which really goes to show you, if you have a really good script and you have, would be writers and, film technique and camera angles, anybody can put something together which is incredible, which is, what will really carry a show. And that's what it's all about. I mean, especially, and I don't want to jump ahead to this day and age, but, everything is CGI today. And, with back in that time frame, they were using, photography models. When we get to Star Trek, we'll talk about it. I had to throw Trek in there because I know somebody's going to say, oh, we were mentioning Trek. And, but yeah, so in that sense.
Funny, you and I said this the other day, but that opening is so amazing to me. And when you listen to it now, you go, wait, of course you control the transmission. That's what television is. So it's a funny meta thing to me. Like, yeah, you control the horizontal and you control pretty much everything. The only thing I control is on and off for a different channel. So it's funny how that grabbed me. And looking back going, wait, that's so silly almost, but enough that it still gets me of, what are they doing with my television? Well, of course that's what they're doing with your television, which is one of the things that's neat to me about this show and that early era of science fiction and horror and everything, is that it's a medium really coming of age and figuring out what it can do in competition with a way richer, more traditional medium of film, that they found a way to do black and white, great shots that are so scary in their simplicity on pretty simple sound stages or one set shooting, in a warehouse or in a apartment building or something. And they found a way to make it work. let alone the fact that I was amazed that it's only a season is 30-some episodes, and that half season, the second season, I could have sworn it ran way longer than a season and a half.
Well, that's such a good point too, Craig, because I mean, it ran for a total of 49 episodes. Oh, and just jumping in here, Mike is even commenting, they did have some great science fiction writers, because Harlan Ellison was one of the writers that actually contributed to the show. And yeah, that's right, Mary Beth. All roads definitely lead back to Star Trek. Have to put that in there. But in film noir, thanks, Deborah. And yes, I don't have my sticky notes tonight. Thanks, Diane. But it's true though. I mean, it was only a season and a half because of it was preempted. I think it was in January. It ran from September 16th of 1963, and then it went off the air in January of 1965. So back in the day, I mean, again, this is another great example. There were 30-some episodes in the first season, which is unheard of today. If a show actually gets 10 episodes in a season, it seems like it's considered a lot, which, I understand, production values are different and, things are done differently. But back in the day, when you can pack, 49 episodes into a season and a half, that's incredible. That's very memorable. And thankfully, we have that, because then we are able to enjoy a show like this. And the other thing too is shows really didn't get the opportunity to go into syndication as much unless they had at least 3 seasons. And this would be an example of a 2-season show, carrying over, because if you think about it, this show has been seen in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and then even the 90s, and up until today. There was an incarnation that was created, I believe, in 1995, where it was redone. Or I'm sorry, I might be wrong. 1985. I stand corrected. And that's something that can be talked about. And actually, my plug, Sci-Fi Distilled with Mike Rizzo and Mary Beth. That's possibly something down the road, because they cover 80s, 90s, and beyond. And in all seriousness, though, that would be something that it's amazing how it led to that.
I think it's also interesting that they sort of cornered their own market, whereas Twilight Zone has little senses of humor, whimsical ones like the Buster Keaton episode done as like a silent movie, or the play on words of "to serve man" or something like that.
Right.
Whereas this one really stays on its dimension, for want of a word, of science fiction, and the fear of the unknown that we felt coming out of the Cold War, and the references back to atomic energy, and just all that science that probably seemed pretty scary to people, and what was next. I love the idea that this show is created just half a decade before we go to the moon.
Yeah.
But that idea seems so far away in the early 60s, that we could pull that off. And that fear of, what happens when we do that? What happens when we go off into space? Despite the, as you say, the models that look sort of silly now,
right,
that obviously look like a, cardboard rocket taking off, with a string attached. But back then, and that idea of, what will we find when we head out there?
Exactly.
I think that's a real testament to this show, that they stayed so true to their purpose from episode to episode to episode over a 30-episode season, and then half a season of 20-some episodes. They didn't decide, let's expand our palette here, the way Rod Serling did so much, and varied his show to such a degree.
Right. Absolutely. And the point that you brought up too earlier too, with it being in a 50-minute time frame, because some of these shows are definitely, it was probably ran for about 53 minutes, but then they get it edited down because of commercials and what have you. This is a show that definitely, I think, in my opinion, in our time frame for the most part worked. But there probably could be some episodes that could have been shortened to maybe like 45 minutes or 40 minutes. I mean, every show has some aspects of that. But one of the ones that I really liked too, and we were talking about it, was the man who was never born. Now, I'm a huge Martin Landau fan, and to me that was excellent work on his part. And that starred with, he was also in that episode with Shirley Knight, and it's an episode that really deals with post-atomic war, what happens to the Earth, in the future, and how civilization has been destroyed. and the attempt to correct what occurred. It's almost like going back and changing the timeline, so to speak, which, theoretically you're not supposed to do. What is and what has happened is what is. And he is approached by an astronaut from this time, 1963, 1964, who's venturing and goes through a time warp and then tries to bring him back to correct what happened, because there was a genetic diffusion that was created as a result of the scientist. And in so doing, Martin Landau, Andros, goes back, but the traveler, the astronaut, does not make it back with him to present day. And what, essentially happens is he's trying to prevent, this child from being born, because he's going to destroy the human race eventually. And he falls in love with the child's mother, and then they go off and they go back into the future. But in so doing, preventing him from that child being born, he becomes the man who was never born. And, you can kind of guess the rest from it. But I thought the cinematography, the concept, a time travel, in my opinion, you just can't go wrong with something like that. And it was just really fascinating and an excellent story.
Yeah, I like the twist at the end, too. Not if anybody goes back and watches it, I don't think we probably have told everything. But that idea that it's love that saves them, and the speech at the end about that this show still had a humanness, a heart to it, that many of the episodes, pretty much all the ones I watched, on your recommendation to cram for our hour here, there's a human element in it that is either our undoing or our salvation, which makes it a cool take on science as well. Yeah,
so true. So very true. In fact, Martin, hey Martin, thanks for joining us tonight. He said similar to the Terminator, and Mike is also commenting, saying, don't forget about Harlan Ellison and James Cameron, taking this for the Soldier for Terminator. Mike, I actually totally agree about that. It's funny because, and I'm just jumping ahead a little bit, Craig. In regards to Soldier, Mike, I had not seen that episode in a long time, and I was, watching bits and pieces of it, and as I was reviewing it and watching it, and I actually hadn't looked at the notes, I was thinking this is very, very, very extremely similar to the whole Terminator concept. And Craig, just to give you an idea about this episode, and I actually haven't seen this episode in many years, Michael Ansara, who is known from Star Trek fandom, he was in the classic episode The Day of the Dove. He played the Klingon Kang, who was a nemesis of Kirk's, and did an excellent job with it. And this was in the third season of Classic Trek. And he's also was married to Barbara Eden, and he was the evil Jinn in I Dream a Genie between 1965 and 1970, a series. Anyhow, his character is fighting in a war. He's a soldier, and he wounds up, there's some kind of blast that occurs, and he winds up going back into time, and he's befriended, and he's with a family. And while this is all happening, things are pretty peaceful, but then his enemy goes back into time, and then they wind up, fighting, and then they wound up, going ahead and then, getting destroyed or, leaving. But it's just that it's very reminiscent of the Terminator, in the sense that, there's two beings that were, fighting that, and then they go back into time, and then they're fighting again, and then, the one of them, dies or they both die. So, yeah, I totally agree about that. And I guess in all honesty, though, all forms of science fiction, there's a basis or a core of some kind of story that inspires or causes another writer to, have a revelation to write something. And then, of course, there's those who just take from others and then, could actually maybe be, as, some have said, like a ripoff online. But, hey, Warren, good to see you out there. Speaking of Harlan Ellison, I want to be the guest when you cover the Canadian sci-fi classic, The Star Lost. I will get back to you on that, Warren. Thanks, I appreciate that. And Rob just ended, Barnes, hey, Rob, how's it going? And, yeah, that was added after a lawsuit. So, yeah, hey, Marianne. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of, things, commentary. This is over a period of almost like 50-plus years, too, with all this stuff going on. So, yeah, it's amazing how science fiction has evolved over the years, and we've seen a lot of similarities in stories that have taken place.
So one question I have for you is, having done this research and coming at the show from syndication, you have as much of a appreciation for the show as just that nostalgia for when you first saw it? So does it, when you come back to it now, do you go, man, this really still holds its own as quality? Granted that it has it doesn't have the budget that, anything now would have. Battlestar Galactica or, Black Mirror that we were talking about earlier.
Right. No, that's
so
That's an excellent question, Craig, and I would have to say yes. And in fact, this is something that I discussed with some other friends too recently. It's, a lot of these shows from the past really hold my attention greatly. I can watch them over and over and over again, and I never get sick of them. I mean, there's some episodes that, I wouldn't bother with, and then there's others that, I probably would watch over and over again. But even with the production values not being as good and, maybe being weaker, now, to be honest, there is a nostalgia element. So I think you're hitting it on that. But I also really feel that a lot of these stories just appeal to me. And even though I do watch stuff, current day, and Vinny will bust my chops all the time. He'll say, oh, Roy's catching up. He's starting to watch stuff in the 80s now, because that's, hey, Vince, right, Vince? But no, in all seriousness, though, I mean, I just have a real appreciation of the 60s and 70s. I tend to favor the 60s shows more so than the 70s. I do enjoy the 70s. I feel that each decade has a tone of its own, and it's something that I can't even put into words, and it's just that it's unique to those individual series of that time. And to me, it's almost like when those shows, and it doesn't even matter what it is, it could be sci-fi, it could be drama, it could be comedy, there's an air, there's a quality maybe in the filming, there's a quality in the style that automatically right away I can say, 70s or 60s. It's just something that I pick up on. And I guess, people, that watch television now could even say that with the 80s, 90s, or even, the double zeros, and now we're I'm saying double zeros, that was 20 years ago. Now we're in, then we were the teens and now the 20s. So it's crazy that, I'm still trying to deal with the fact that 1966 was 54 years ago. I mean, I haven't gotten past that yet, but,
Think of how many of those TV shows had huge ratings back in the 60s that we never really want to go back to.
True.
You and I were talking about how the one piece of research talked about how they changed the night that this was broadcast, and the show went up against the Jackie Gleason show, which for anybody, from now, I think you know who Jackie Gleason is from The Honeymooners.
Oh, absolutely.
But he had this variety show that was even had a sort of sketch in it of The Honeymooners as part of it in its time frame on Saturday nights. And Outer Limits got crushed in the ratings. I can't imagine wanting to go watch a Honeymooners episode ever, of a variety show from that time. Or those comedies that I thought were so funny back then when I was a little kid. My Mother, the Car.
Oh, jeez.
A lot of, F Troop holds up for me.
Gotcha.
But a lot of those comedies or the variety shows, or even say the detective shows, seem really corny and so specific of their time. They don't feel at all as universal as this or Twilight Zone do to me. Let alone even into the 70s when Rod Serling brought back Night Gallery, which I think was a real good redo of it. I know purists don't agree with that, but some of those episodes have stayed with me forever. The Sid here comes to mind with John Boy Walton, etc.
Right.
So I think it's interesting that this show, in its limited time, we know it. And I also think one of the qualities that shows had back then were phenomenal themes, great openings like the one you played at the beginning of this, that we remember more than we necessarily remember given episodes. The Twilight Zone opening is magical, even when they changed it along the way, to the point that when you take the Twilight Zone ride at Disney World, it's that opening you go through in holograms, which is awesome. Is better than the fall at the end, for me anyway.
That's so cool, and that's so true. What you're saying, it really, really does. You're hitting it right nail on the head with that. It really, really is, and it just makes you wonder where all this is going to evolve into. But that's why I really enjoy the '60s so much. Oh, you know what? Comment that just came up. Mike just brought up, Mike, Wolf 359, Star Trek, The Next Generation, Best of Both Worlds, Part 1. That was where they were actually going to meet for their battle against the Borg. And it's funny, when that title or that coordinate was mentioned during the episode of Next Generation, I immediately thought of that, how the Outer Limits actually used that. And I think that was probably giving them homage to that. So that was really, really cool that they did that. And it's like these little references that took place. But honestly, though, I did not realize that there was such a what was going on with Harlan Ellison, because there's a lot of commentary going out there, Craig, about that, and I honestly was not aware of that. So that is kind of interesting. But one of the other episodes that we were talking about too, The Demon with the Glass Hand with Robert Culp. That's another classic. That what were your thoughts about that, Greg?
Well, I remember being allowed to stay up to watch I Spy back in the day, so that's how I knew Robert Culp.
Mm-hmm.
It came on at 10 o'clock on like Tuesday nights or something. But my parents were awfully liberal about letting me stay up as a little dude to watch television. I got to go to bed at 11.
Cool.
Which I don't think I let my kids do. For the 10 o'clock adult shows that used to be on.
Right.
I Spy was one of them. I was really impressed in that episode with his acting, actually.
Yeah.
And pretty much all of them. I think the acting really is fine. The silliness of some of the premises at times, the fact that the aliens were still using guns and not some sort of advanced weaponry, in that episode, for instance.
Right.
But the idea of the hand, let alone the huge twist at the end, which I didn't see coming at all, was really smart. And it's funny, my wife and I watched the Twilight Zone marathon pretty much every 4th of July and New Year's. And the one episode where they send, I think it's Stuart Whitman, to a planet because he's a convicted criminal. We won't talk about the cost efficiency of this sort of penal system, but they send him a woman, and they use the word, she's a robot. And we both went, she's a what? Like, they didn't use a robot. And, we thought maybe the one actor just had a weird accent from somewhere, but they all called her a robot. So the idea this was so new, we didn't even have that word yet.
Right.
We knew how to pronounce it. This is all so new and out there in so many cool ways. So in that regard, not giving away the ending to the demon with the crystal hand.
The glass
so
hand.
Smart. And once again, maybe a little. The fact that once again the girl falls in love with him right away, and you go, oh, okay. Romance and love and that side of humanity versus the cold-blooded aliens, at least in some episodes.
Right.
In other episodes, the aliens have more heart than we do, which is classic science fiction twist as well.
Oh,
go right through Arthur C. Clarke, right through everybody.
Absolutely. And that was an episode that was written by Harlan Ellison, too. Oh, we have Phil. Captain Phil is joining us. Hey, Captain Phil. Hey, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it. Yeah, that was really, it was well done. And again, with the film techniques and the darkness and the tone, it exemplified that episode. I mean, it just added to it. And Star Trek trivia there, the girl that was with Robert Culp and was after her, does anybody out there know who that was, who the actress was, or the character that she played in classic Star Trek? Just curious. I mean, we are on a little bit of a delay here, so I'm going to give about maybe 20 seconds to see if what people start typing in. But she was in a classic Star Trek episode, and she was in a prominent character in classic Star Trek. Does anybody know who that was?
Offer prizes, Roy.
Yeah.
People to be ready for your trivia every episode.
Nobody's typing away yet, so hopefully I'm not on too much of a delay, and I didn't scare anybody off with that. But I'm waiting to see. It still hasn't come through yet. But I'll circle back to that maybe about 30, 35 seconds. Also, there's, in fact, talking about trivia and Star Trek with that, the alien is portrayed by a classic Star Trek actor. He was in one episode, and I will give a hint. He was in a first season episode. I'm not going to give away any hints about who the girl was right away, but we'll see if anybody responds in regards to that. But so far, it's been kind of quiet on that end. But
it's cool to talk about how so many of these actors we come to know later on.
Yeah.
Martin Sheen in the one I watched today baby Martin Sheen. I mean, he looks like he's 12.
He was a nightmare. Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
Martin Sheen got his start there, and with television. I mean, it's amazing because a lot of these actors. I mean, we were talking about when we were covering One Step Beyond. Warren Beatty, and was in there, and you had Joan Fontaine as well too. But yeah, it was. He looked very, very young. He was probably in his mid-20s, I'm guessing, because if even that,
We talk about that as a golden age of television because there were so many offerings. There were only 3 networks. So now, when you think of how much product there is out there, that you can't possibly watch all of it.
Right.
That we live in this golden time that our kids are going to look back to and say, "Oh man, that was amazing. I could watch a new series every week and never run out." It feels that way watching this. Of how many of those people go on to do this, and how lucky we are that they had those careers and this has been preserved, so you can watch them in those younger years and this younger versions of themselves.
Yeah, it's extremely cool. Well, you know what? I'm probably having technical difficulties. Go figure on my laptop. So, but I did see on my iPhone that somebody had typed in, and yes, it was T. Pring, and it was Spock's wife, actress Arlene Martell, who was in the second season episode of Amok Time in classic Star Trek. She was also in The Demon with the Glass Hand, and I'm not sure if anybody got who the other actor was that was playing the alien. That was the actor's name is Abraham Sophia. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And he was also in the classic Star Trek episode Charlie X. He was the Thasian that was on the video screen. So we've covered and talked about this in a couple in the episodes we've talked about a few weeks ago, that how there was a pool of actors at that time that pretty much was making their rounds, and it's so cool to see them in these different episodes. I mean, I never get tired of that. I mean, I just think it's so cool. But yeah.
How do you feel about the fact that the show is directed by so many various directors, and the fact that a wider variety of writers in Twilight Zone? It seems to me, and you know more about that than I do. We were talking about Richard Matheson being one of the main Twilight Zone writers who wrote all those classic episodes
right.
that we know, Eric, 20,000 Feet, Prey on Night Gallery, etc. But the idea that it feels like there really is a brand here, but it's directed and written by such a variety of people. I'm not sure how they were able to keep it, if that makes sense.
Oh, it definitely makes sense. And I think it's great to have different directors because I think that keeps it fresh. But I also believe that each show almost has their own Bible. I mean, that there's a formula or format that you have to follow. And I think with the first season episodes of The Outer Limits, it was pretty much following that format where you had what they called the bear, like I was saying earlier. Joseph Stefano had referred to that, is where it's the alien or the creature, so to speak, that you're dealing with. And it really helps because it is formulaic to a point, but at the same point, there are different twists and turns that'll take, and sometimes it's a happy ending, sometimes it's not. I mean, it's going to go in a different direction, and it's science, sort of science-based. I think the first season dealt more with being more horror science fiction elements and tones, but in suspenseful. And then I think the second season went a little bit more towards science fiction, is from what I'm gathering. I'm actually going to just take a look here. Controlled Experiment. Diane just mentioned. Diane, that's excellent. That's a great mention. Controlled Experiment was an episode in the Outer Limits that kind of broke that formula. It was starring Carol O'Connor from All in the Family, and it also had Barry Morse from The Fugitive from the 60s, because The Fugitive, I believe, was on from 1964 to 1968, if memory serves correctly. And then, of course, he later went on to do one of my favorite science fiction television series, and this is where Space 1999 gets a plug. And he played Professor Victor Bergman in the first season. And also, Grace Lee Whitney was in that episode, and she was one of the main characters. Also, I found out, and it was funny, talking about Star Trek actors and recurring actors that are utilized, there is Paul, and I want to say Manti, I think that was his last name, and he actually was in that episode, and he played Tomar in the Star Trek episode, which was By Any Other Name. So he actually was in that as well, which was kind of cool. So again, you have your resurgence of actors that are being utilized. But this episode was the only episode in The Outer Limits which was a comedy. And it kind of broke the formula with that, and they kept using the same footage over and over again. So I'm sure, from a standpoint of production values, it came in pretty cheap. I also read, too, that Barry Morse had once said that this was possibly going to be a pilot, or used as a pilot for another type of, series. Something that, shows would do. And, you get somebody's attention, and then, you spring off, and, it goes from there. Actually, thinking about it, like All in the Family, you had Maude, you had Good Times, you had The Jeffersons. So you have a show that's doing very well, or you're hoping is doing very well, and then they springboard off of it. So I thought that was kind of cool to read that about Controlled Experiment, especially since it was something that was a little bit out of the ordinary with that.
Yeah, the idea of there's not a whole lot of laughs when you're watching these episodes. There's no sort of even clever tongue-in-cheek, like, no, the way to serve man, or the frontier lady with the invaders on her roof.
Yes.
That no, like, you throw your popcorn up in the air and sort of chuckle that Rod pulled the rug out from under you. Here, the twist at the end is usually kind of a punch as opposed to a chuckle.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. And it's interesting, too. You were talking about Robert Culp. Robert Culp actually did 3 episodes of The Outer Limits. His first one was The Architects of Fear. He did Corpus Earthling. And then, of course, he did Demon with the Glass Hand. And Architects of Fear was their 3rd episode they filmed. And I found it interesting. I've seen most of these episodes years ago, but I've been watching them more often and then catching up, especially for our discussion. And Architects of Fear was about a group of scientists that it was almost like a council of scientists. And what they were fearful about was the direction mankind was going in as far as being unified. And what they felt would happen is, if they said in the past, if man was, threatened with any type of war, or a biological agent, and, there was some kind of conflict, it would bring humanity together. So what they do is they decide that they're going to orchestrate having almost an alien invasion take place, because they have this alien that they had gotten from the planet Theta, and it's this little thing. They take its DNA, and what their decision to do is to implant it in one of the 10 scientists, and they draw straws to see who's going to be the lucky person. And the person that gets chosen for this is Robert Culp's character. And essentially, he's giving up his life. I mean, his life, as he knows it, is going to end going forward, and it's very sad. And he's married, and I think him and his wife had talked about having children, and it wasn't going to happen for whatever reasons. And he was trying, they were trying to get past that, and he starts to get injected, and the changes start to take place. And essentially, this goes on, and what they need to do is they need to fake his death, and his death is faked, and she's in total denial of this happening. And right before they part, and he's supposedly going to go on a trip, and the plane crashes, they're leaving each other, and she does this like sign on his forehead and says "No evil." It's a protection against no evil. And what happens then is, she goes back to the lab where they work, and the other scientist, who's Leonard Stone, another character actor from that time, tells her not to come back. They transform him. They shoot him up in a rocket. Then the rocket is supposed to descend. It's supposed to go to the land right in the area of the White House, and it's supposed to scare everybody. And their plan is just to have like this invasion that's going to take place, and then everybody's going to have to work together. Instead, it lands. It comes back to Earth, and it doesn't land where it's supposed to at the White House. It lands where they launched this rocket, and these hunters are out. They see him. And Robert Culp is this alien. I mean, he's a Thetan now, and they shoot him, and he's trying to get back to the lab. Meanwhile, when he gets shot, his wife is out, and she feels the pain that he has, and then she goes to the lab. She finds him and sees the alien, and she's terrified. And then he puts his hand up, what is part of it looks like his hand, and then he goes like this, and then she realizes it's him. And then the scientists come in, and they're like, you don't understand. We thought we could do this. And then she goes, I know what you thought. Put a scarecrow out, and then it would bring everybody together. But then she says all scarecrows don't work. But I just felt it very interesting how, with this specific story, that it was about something that's happening, they were trying to incite that, mankind is going against a common threat or common enemy, and, people, populations would be banding together. And with, the entire climate that what we're dealing with right now, you would think and you would hope that would happen with our world. And this was 1963, this is 2020. You would hope that, people would band together and, work together and be more unified. And it unfortunately, to be determined, TBD. I'm not going to be negative. I'm going to be positive. This is a positive show. But I just felt that it was interesting how there was a message in that, and it kind of resonated, 57 years later. So, knock on wood that's the direction we're going, that, with all this. But it's just interesting from a writer standpoint that, how something, from, half a century ago, it can, be connected with current day.
It's funny to think about how we viewed aliens as the Martians in War of the Worlds twice.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about them in Contact by Carl Sagan, and then the movie, I think, with Jodie Foster. But then Arrival, most recently,
yes,
where, aliens come, we're not sure what's going on, and then the human factor is involved, where, the humans mess it up in making, with this chance to make contact.
Right.
And that idea as well, that I thought from the episodes I watched that you recommended, there's this Pandora's box about science that's really so fascinating to me, that scientists, even that very first one, Cliff Robertson's messing around with it, using radio waves, to contact aliens. But it's the human factor, sort of like Jurassic Park,
right,
where it's the idea, the guy who's greedy. In that first episode, it's a guy who's greedy for fame, who screws around, not to give away, that episode either. But that idea of, chaos theory, it's going to be humans that are going to mess this up even more than the aliens. It feels on so many of these. But that feeling of people coming together that the both Independence Days had, that big speech at the end where they go to fight the aliens, made me, tear up, as ridiculous as sort of the movie was on so many levels. The idea that the aliens always hit landmarks and such.
Yeah.
That idea of humanity coming together for a common purpose, I so agree with you. And would have hoped this one we would have felt that way sooner. The same way we did in America when 9/11 happened. I remember that unity making, when the senators were singing on the steps of the Senate that night. Makes me want to tear up now, thinking of, we did. And I so agree with you that these shows bring that out too. That episode that I watched today.
Oh, Nightmare.
The crew is all, they cover every nationality.
Yeah.
And they talk about that, the unified Earth symbol on their uniforms, as they go to fight. It is something you would hope in the future we would achieve. We become just a planet. That idea that we didn't think of it until the moon landing, when we had that shot of Earth rising, and you went, wow, there's our planet. We're all on this. It's so cool. But, as you said, 60 years later, we still haven't quite achieved that.
Yeah, and I think that's the scary part of it all. And like I said, trying to stay positive with all that, but it's almost like it's, mankind's lesson, so to speak, when you're thinking about it, the way it just kind of pans out. But yeah, and with that episode that we were with Nightmare, what's interesting about that is that they were trying to do that. They had these, for those who haven't seen this episode, it was another episode of The Outer Limits, that it's the camera angles, it's the tone. There's this like humming when they're walking. They're on this alien planet. It's the lighting. it all comes to be from that, from that specific episode. And what they're trying to do is these men, these officers, think that they are at war with this planet, Ebonites, and they feel that they have to battle them, and they're captured and they're being interrogated, and they're trying to get information, and they're almost being turned against each other. And what the twist is, and forgive me for giving it away, but you could always go back and watch it, and I'm sure most of our fans out of the series have watched it. They find out that there is no war going on. The Ebonites did this by accident. It wasn't an attack against the Earth. It was something that happened where they caused some destruction, but it wasn't on purpose. However, the military wants to find out how our soldiers would react in battle if we are at war with other aliens. So they have created this kind of partnership with the Ebonites to do this type of scenario, and I'll even say torture, where to see how they'll respond and if they will rat each other out and what happens. And the Ebonites don't want to have this continue because they're fearful that somebody's going to get killed. And the leader, the general, who's portrayed by Walt Bissell, who's known in science fiction fandom, he was in the Time Tunnel, and also he's known as this station manager, Laurie, in the classic Star Trek episode The Trouble with Tribbles. And he's like, no, this must continue. And what happens is the prisoners of war grab the Ebonite, and then they get a gun, and then a guy, one of the generals comes in, one of the sergeants comes in, and they're like, release him. And they're like, no, and they shoot him. And then one of our own men dies as a result of this. So it wasn't the aliens that actually caused the destruction. The irony, it was mankind. It was the humans. And that was the point I believe you were trying to make, Craig. And it's so true. And it was a lesson to be learned.
There's so many of those, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or E.T., the Spielberg take on this, or even all the way back to King Kong.
Yeah.
How the movie reverses by the end when you really feel for him on the Empire State Building,
Yeah.
having those planes shooting at him. And you're like, no, he's trying to save the girl. That twist of where we become the bad guys somehow,
Right.
is just fascinating.
It really is.
And I think you get that good point of in that early season where it's always the bear, it's always a monster, but then we sort of go, wait, is it a monster? Did I jump too quick to that conclusion? The classic, Godzilla, where fire, when they just start wailing away with firepower against these, creatures. Oftentimes, the creatures, it's not their fault.
No,
they happen to beat it.
It's a matter of circumstance.
Which movie you're watching?
Right.
But also then true, the twist. I've been amazed watching these again. That it's often a double twist, even at the end, where you think you have it, like, okay, I saw that coming, and then you don't see the last one coming at all, which is really fascinating to me.
Exactly. You think it's going in one direction and it actually goes in another. Hey, I just want to give a shout out. Hi, Deborah. Thanks for joining us. That's really nice. I'm glad you're able to tune in tonight. Thank you for being here. And also, Joe, I want to say hi to you. And, Mike's giving us a priority 1 distress signal from Space Station K7. Yeah, okay. Classic Star Trek reference.
I want to let you have a plug here, too. The information you gave me that people watching this should know. These are available through Amazon Prime,
yes.
Which I wasn't aware of. When you told me, hey, if you want to do some, getting ready for this, you can see both seasons on Amazon Prime. So it's neat that those are there. I wasn't even aware of that, so that's good to know, and I appreciated that hint from you.
Oh, absolutely, and I was happy to share that. No, thanks, Craig. One of the other points I did want to bring out too, that because we've been talking about a lot of the episodes individually and everything. People that were involved in this, the behind the scenes, because I, just from doing a little digging. So, first AD and also the production manager on the show. Any ideas out there who that was? And I'm kind of glancing over because I'm on a delay here, and I have a feeling some of my fellow Trek fans are going to know who this is, and I'm just kind of waiting. Hey, Dave Bolter, how are you? Just saying hi. I'm going to give the answer in 2 seconds. Hey, Kevin, how's it going? Thanks for joining us. Great to see other fans out here. It was Robert Justman who was instrumental in classic Star Trek history, and he worked on this series, which is really cool. And he was definitely a staple. And then he went on to be in classic Star Trek, to be involved with it for at least two, from the Cage on, and then he was in up until the half, throughout the entire first season, second season, and then most of the third season, except right at the end. You had some directors. There's a director by the name of Gerard Oswald. He actually directed 2 classic Star Trek episodes. One was Conscience of the King, and then the other one was The Alternative Factor. And I found it interesting, too, that he had directed those episodes, because you and I were talking before, too, Greg, about, the different types of, how directing can affect. And those 2 classic Star Trek episodes are kind of atypical. Conscience of the King, it dealt with Shakespeare, Conscience of the King, obviously. But Alternative Factor was just a bizarre episode for classic Star Trek first season. And we'll talk about that at another time. And I know a lot of my friends other friends out there are going to be saying about, always going back to Star Trek. But the production, as far as the photography, the person that handled that his name was Conrad Hall, and he did most of the first season, and he was responsible for it. He had actually won 3 Academy Awards in his career, so I thought that was really interesting. And to me, just the way he set up that show, it really comes through. It was really amazing.
You love that level of talent came, to a TV show from Hollywood.
Yeah.
That they didn't see it as, cheapening their art to do that. That this was still a high quality enough of a medium for them to want to do that. Because the lighting is amazing on these.
Yeah.
Those angles, the black and whites. That classic, this is such an okay boomer thing to say, but there is that just sort of magic to black and white that you kind of miss. Whereas if I show that in one of my classes, anything black and white, they just immediately turn off. It's so ancient. I might as well, be showing them Canterbury Tales or something. That it feels so distant.
Isn't that amazing?
It's so good.
It's really, I really feel that that's almost generational. I'll be honest with you, growing up, when, I think we got a color television, it was probably in 1973, and I remember it was a big deal because we had a 25-inch Zenith Chroma-Color. Chroma-Color, that was like the bomb, you know what I mean? And it was, when I think about that, it's just such a joke. And the color was, but it's still, to be able to watch it, because up until that point, all we had was black and white. And a big selling point for a lot of these shows, especially in the 60s, a lot of these shows started out, maybe a first season was in black and white, and then they went into color. Example of that, we talked about, last week, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. The same thing was done with that. Lost in Space, same thing, first season episode, and then they went to color. And these shows were very vibrant with their colors, because that was a way for them to really stand out. Classic Star Trek was always in color, from the first pilot on to the last episode, but still, you had, the very, with the uniforms, it was, the bright red, the bright blue, and then you had well, there's always a debate about, the uniforms, if it was gold or green, but anyway, for command, for Kirk's uniform. But still, it was very vibrant, and I've even read that maybe even RCA was a sponsor, so, you had that in the background going on, but that was a way of selling. But some of these shows, to me, if they were colorized, like, to watch this, if, back in the 80s, that was the big thing, where these shows were being colorized, and I was not a fan of it, because what they were doing is they were destroying the originals, or at least I think that's what I remember hearing, and you would lose that. To me, if you're going to colorize, that's fine. Be given the choice. You can watch it in black and white, or you can watch it in color, but don't destroy a piece of history, because I can't imagine watching these in color. To me, that would take away half the effect. It just wouldn't work. And it just was the tone of the series.
I think that's a great point. From that, Hollywood had been colorized for movies were color, but early black and white TV, it was still the new exciting medium back then.
Yeah.
In that way, even though it had that disadvantage, let alone the small screen, that tiny screen we all watched back in the day, let alone advertising breaking in every 20 minutes or whatever. But still, it was the way a new cell phone is now. TV was the medium.
It really was.
And movies were so scared. Thought they were going to lose market share. The
Oh.
same way, we're worried now. What's going to be the new thing? Are we never going to go back to the movies? Now that we do stream everything, that sort of battle for our hearts, and our viewing is fascinating to me. Looking at this, that these shows really did get you excited, every week, and you couldn't tape them yet.
No.
You had to be there.
No.
You and I talked about that earlier.
Yes.
The idea of Friday nights, you knew you wanted to see Twilight Zone. You'd be at the store going, we got to get home. We don't want to miss this. Must-see TV was a real thing back then because there wasn't a VCR or a DVR. You had to see it live.
Yeah.
You had to see it when it was on. Or try to catch it in reruns in the summer. But I guess if they ran 30 episodes, you couldn't see them, in the summer for Outer Limits. There were too many.
Right.
It's 3/5 of the year. You're only going to see a percentage. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Just how exciting TV was back then.
Absolutely, and it's interesting too. Hey, Catherine, just want to say hi. I'm seeing you there. You should never. I agree, Catherine. She's saying you should never colorize and give options of black and white. It's like cutting up a Picasso and putting the ears where they belong.
That's great.
Absolutely, that's such a great point. Also, I just want to say, hey, Rob, thanks for joining. Good to see you. And Vinny, I saw you out there earlier. I want to say hi. I can't call Vince Vinny. Everybody on the planet can call him Vinny, but I can't do it. And
one of the things I noticed watching these too, the close-ups are way close up.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you caught that. That camera's right at in their pores there. I think we're lucky that it's not high def anymore than it would be because wow, that camera gets close on these people.
But you know what though, Greg, you're bringing up a good point. With a lot of these shows, with Blu-ray technology, you see a lot of things that you were not meant to see. I mean, and you in some shows you'll see the floorboards, and they'll down to the nitty gritty. It's amazing because of things that are picked up that shouldn't have been picked up, and that's an excellent point about that. One other thing I wanted to bring up too. We were talking about behind the scenes, as far as special effects and props. Hua Chang, who created the classic Star Trek communicators, he was a prop master on this show. And also makeup, Fred Phillips, who was known from classic Star Trek. He did Spock's years. And also John Chambers was also a makeup man. John Chambers worked on Lost in Space, but he also was known for a very popular 1968 film. Does anybody out there know? And I'm actually able to check this out. So here's a big trivia question. John Chambers, anybody know? I'm curious. We are on a delay, but I'm going to see who answers and puts that out there. And I'm going to give you 10 seconds on that. Any ideas on that, Craig, who that would be? John Chambers was an Academy Award winner, too, as far as makeup.
Oh, man, 68.
68.
I'm guessing it's not in the science fiction or horror.
It is, actually. It is.
Okay.
Hi, Margaret. Thanks for joining.
No idea.
No idea? Oh, Rob Barnes got it. Planet of the Apes. Good job, Rob.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he actually did an episode of Lost in Space, and I didn't, we only covered the first season of Lost in Space last Sunday. But where the makeup was these lookalikes of Dr. Smith, and there were like 100 robots that were looking like Smith, and he basically made again, that's 2 for tonight. He had a mask, and it looked just like Jonathan Harris. It was scary, and Jonathan Harris actually had kept this for the longest time, but then I think it decomposed because you're talking decades. But it was really, really cool. But I'm going to start to wind down. This has been really great though, Craig, talking with you. I mean, I really appreciate you being on.
I had a great time, Roy. Thanks so much for inviting me.
No, absolutely, and I definitely would like to have you on again if you'd like to join us too.
Love to.
Just as a little bit more trivia, just to point out. Some other actors that actually had been on The Outer Limits, and I'm going to name some of them, was David McCullum, Martin. We talked about Martin Landau. Oh, you know what? I have one more trivia question before I go. And this is going to be a classic Star Trek trivia question. What episode of The Outer Limits featured 4 classic Star Trek episode personnel or actors in the episode? Does anybody out there have any idea what that is? Just curious, and I will give about a minute, and I'll come back to that. But yeah, there were 4 actors actually in this Outer Limits episode, and I was like, and it was funny because I was originally counting 3, and then I said, oh my God, you know what? There's actually a 4th one, and I thought that was amazing. And hey, Bill's just joined us. Hey, how you doing? Hi, Francine. Do you have any ideas, Craig?
I know you didn't advise me to watch the Shatner episode, which those out there who have accused you of being too much of a Trekkie on every episode, I said, wow, he must be awful in this, or it's a bad episode.
William Shatner did a great job, because I love William Shatner's work, and no matter what he does, I think he's an incredible actor. And he was in Twilight Zone. He was in the Outer Limits episode called Cold Hands, Warm Heart. And he played an astronaut that goes to Venus. And when he comes back, he's starting to shiver and have the shakes, and he feels, he's starting to transform. It was not one of my favorite Outer Limits episodes. I enjoyed seeing him in that episode for 2 reasons, because I love seeing him in pre-classic Star Trek material. And then also, he in that episode was another actor called whose name is Malachi Throne, who played Commodore Mendez in the classic Star Trek episode The Menagerie, Part 1 and Part 2. So it was really cool to see him, interacting with him, because they were friends in that, and they were actually friends. It was his doctor in that episode of Outer Limits. But I wanted to give you recommend the other episodes to you, because I just thought that those were more. I don't want to say insightful. I just thought they meant more to me as far as from that standpoint. And I thought those would be ones that you would really enjoy, since you hadn't watched it in a while. But I don't know if anybody guessed on that trivia question, but I'm going to tell you what it is. Believe it or not, it's that episode I was telling everybody about earlier that scared the bejesus out of me when I was a kid. And it was the production and decay of strange particles. And here are the actors that were in it. Leonard Nimoy, he played one of the technicians at the very beginning, who was trying to dismantle he was working with the isotope, and he was in the radiation suit. And he's obviously Mr. Spock, and he was through all 79 episodes of classic Trek. Joseph Ruskin, who was the lead thrall in the classic Star Trek episode The Gamesters of Triskelion. Barry Russo, who was in 2 classic episodes of Star Trek. He was in The Devil in the Dark, where he was a security chief, and then he was also in The Ultimate Computer, in which he played Commodore Wesley. And then the final actor is Robert Fortier. Now, he actually did 2 episodes of The Outer Limits. He did this one, and he did Controlled Experiment, but he played Tomar in By Any Other Name. So you had 4 classic Star Trek actors in one episode of The Outer Limits. How cool is that? So just a little trivia out there for the Star Trek fans. But so I'm gonna start to wrap it up, and just wanted to end with this. And this was the at the ending of The Outer Limits. This was from the first episode when Vic Perrin is actually closing, and I thought this was interesting. And the dialogue was, the planet, and I won't be able to do it with my Vic Perrin voice, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to read it. Remote and alone in the void, there are powers in the universe inscrutable and profound. Few cannot save us. Rage cannot help us. We must see the stranger in a new light, the light of understanding, and to achieve this, we must begin to understand ourselves and each other. And I thought that was really, really profound. I thought that was, especially for, the ending of the first episode, and that was with Cliff Robertson. So, quick shout outs to, for Sci-Fi Distilled, Mike Rizzo has a new series that is dealing with science fiction of the 80s and 90s and beyond. His co-host has been Mary Beth Rakowski, and this is on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and they actually have done 2 episodes. It's a lot of fun, and it's actually talking movies, TV, drinks, and just relaxing, and just, friends getting together, sort of like this. It's just a great time. It's just a time to, to bond and, just to be together, and it's definitely check it out. And again, that's on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And this coming Wednesday, they're going to be talking about The Fifth Element, and they're actually going to have a guest host on who's Ken Schmidt. Looking forward to seeing it. Also, just so you know, if you are interested in Outer Limits memorabilia, David Frankham actually had posted on his Facebook page last night, and there is a new book coming out by Dave Rash. It's going to be a limited edition and a regular book, and it basically is going to cover the scripts that were owned and by Joseph Stefano, and he has the rights to them from Joseph Stefano's wife and son, and he's going to be producing a limited edition as well as a regular edition, and it's going to be the scripts of the series of the Outer Limits, classic Outer Limits. So that's something to be to look out for. And I believe David's going to be doing with the limited edition, he's going to be doing an autograph signing. So just check out his Facebook page. David's a great guy. Had the opportunity to meet him up in person at Trek Conderoga last year in Ticonderoga at the Star Trek series set tour, which is incredible. So you definitely you want to check that out down in the future, and also just be on the lookout for this. So again, thank you so much, Craig. It was wonderful having you on. It's wonderful and just a lot of fun to be able to just kind of like talk about these shows and just kind of reminisce, and then just, have fun discussing them. It's just a great time. And this Sunday I will be on with my guest co-host is going to be Mike Rizzo from Sci-Fi Distilled. And that'll be for episode number 6, which is going to be Battlestar Galactica. This is going to be our first 1970s show we are going to be covering. We've been doing a lot of 60s, and I thought it would be time to kind of like change it up a little bit. And, we're going to go back and forth with the 60s and 70s, just so everybody knows there is no order that we are doing these. It's essentially, we're going to do 60s and 70s. We may jump around within the decade, so there's definitely a lot of material out there for us to cover. Really looking forward to covering it. There's a lot of sci-fi from both of those decades. And in the near future, these episodes will be posted upon YouTube, and you'll be able to watch them. But for right now, if you want to go back and watch any of the episodes, please just scroll back onto my Facebook page, and you'll be able to watch them there. So with that, I just want to say thank you again, Craig.
So much fun. Really great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody, stay safe, especially social distancing at this time. Hopefully things will start to get better within the world. And I know we're just taking each day as it comes, and, we'll get there. But we just have to just stay safe and just be aware of everything. So just everybody live long and prosper, and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.